You're lying on the ground. It's dark. You haven't moved in 6 hours. You're breathing slowly, rhythmically, completely unconscious, with zero awareness of your surroundings. Your muscles are relaxed. Your reaction time is essentially zero. You are, by every measurable metric, the most vulnerable you will ever be in your entire life. And somewhere out there, a lion is awake. Now here's the thing that should bother you more than it does. Humans sleep outside. We have for almost all of our existence. For the overwhelming majority of the 300,000 years that anatomically modern humans have walked this planet, there was no door to lock, no wall to hide behind, no roof between your unconscious body and everything in the dark that wanted to eat you. And yet, here you are, descended from people who survived that, who slept in the open or in shallow caves or under trees, surrounded by predators that could have killed them effortlessly while they lay there completely helpless. So why didn't they? Why don't predators just wait? Why doesn't every lion, leopard, hyena, and crocodile on the African savanna figure out, at some point, that the weird hairless ape is completely defenseless for 8 hours every night? Why hasn't natural selection produced a predator that specializes in sleeping humans? The answer is not what you think it is. And it involves fire, evolution, group behavior, and one of the most fascinating biological arms races in the history of life on this planet. Let's start with the assumption buried inside the question. Because the question, why do predators ignore sleeping humans, already contains a mistake. They don't. Not always. Not historically. And understanding how wrong that assumption is changes everything about why we're alive to ask it. Predators absolutely have killed sleeping humans. They have done it throughout history, across every continent, in numbers that would genuinely disturb you if they were compiled into a single document, which, fortunately for your sleep schedule, they mostly haven't been. The most documented case study is the Tsavo man-eaters. In 1898, during the construction of a railway bridge in what is now Kenya, 2 male lions began systematically hunting and killing the construction workers. At night, while they slept, they entered tents, dragged men out of their bedrolls, and disappeared into the darkness. Construction stopped. Workers fled. And these 2 lions, over the course of roughly 9 months, killed somewhere between 35 and 135 people, depending on which historical account you trust. They weren't opportunistic. They were deliberate. They learned the pattern of human sleep, they learned the layout of the camp, and they exploited it with a consistency that terrified an entire workforce into abandoning a colonial engineering project. That's not an animal that finds humans too intimidating to approach at night. That's an animal that figured out the system and ran it. So the real question isn't why predators never attack sleeping humans. The real question is why they don't do it more. Given how easy it should theoretically be, given how utterly defenseless we are, why isn't this a more common predator strategy across more species? And the answer to that question takes us somewhere genuinely unexpected. Let's talk about fire. Because you can't talk about human survival at night without talking about fire, and you can't talk about fire without realizing that it isn't just a source of warmth or light. It is one of the most psychologically significant stimuli in the animal kingdom. Most animals have an instinctive fear response to fire, not a learned response. Not something they figured out from experience. An innate, hardwired, deep in the brainstem fear that predates their individual experience entirely. Baby animals that have never seen fire in their lives will recoil from flames. This response exists because fire in the natural world means catastrophe. It means habitat destruction, it means suffocation, it means death with no warning and no escape. The animals that survived long enough to pass on their genes were the ones whose nervous systems treated fire as an unconditional threat requiring immediate withdrawal. And then humans came along and started carrying it around on purpose. Think about what this means from the perspective of a predator approaching a human campsite at night. You're a leopard. You're hungry. You can smell the sleeping bodies. You could take one. But there's fire there. Not a wildfire, not something you can run from in a direction, just a controlled flame sitting there, burning quietly, in the middle of everything. Your entire evolutionary history screams at you that fire is wrong, that fire is danger, that fire is the one thing you do not approach unless you have no other option. Humans with fire are surrounded by an invisible psychological barrier that most predators are neurologically incapable of crossing without extreme motivation. This is one of the primary reasons our ancestors could sleep. Not because the predators couldn't get to them, because the predators didn't want to. The cost-benefit calculation, calculated not consciously but at the level of ancient nervous system wiring, came out wrong. There were easier meals elsewhere. The fire changed the math. But here's the thing about fire as a defense strategy. It has a critical vulnerability. It goes out. Which brings us to the next layer of this story. Humans are not solitary sleepers. We haven't been for almost our entire evolutionary history, and this is not a coincidence. It is one of the most important survival technologies our species ever developed, and we built it without building anything at all. Group sleeping. The practice of never sleeping alone, of arranging bodies in a configuration where someone is always lighter, always more alert, always positioned to detect and respond to an approach from outside. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer populations, groups whose sleep patterns are likely the closest living approximation of how our ancestors slept, have found something remarkable. They don't all sleep at the same time. A 2017 study, published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, examined the sleep patterns of the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still living in a way that approximates pre-agricultural human life. Researchers found that over a 20-day period, there was almost no moment, day or night, where all members of the group were in deep sleep simultaneously. Someone was always in a lighter sleep phase. Someone was always close enough to wakefulness that an unusual sound, a shift in the air, a change in the fire's behavior would bring them to full alertness within seconds. They called this sentinel behavior, and it means that a predator approaching a sleeping human group was never really approaching a group that was entirely asleep. It was approaching a distributed early warning system that happened to have its eyes closed. The Tsavo lion succeeded partly because the construction camp was not organized the way a human group evolved to sleep. It was an industrial encampment arranged for logistical efficiency, not predator defense. The social architecture that normally protected sleeping humans had been replaced by the social architecture of a colonial engineering project. And the lions found the gap. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. And this is the part that most people have never heard. We don't just rely on group vigilance and fire to protect us while we sleep. We also, apparently, rely on something we broadcast without knowing it. Humans have a smell. Every animal does. And the specific cocktail of compounds that humans emit, the particular combination of skin bacteria byproducts, volatile organic compounds, carbon dioxide from breathing, all of it creates a chemical signature that is uniquely human. And that signature, it turns out, carries information. Studies on predator behavior have found that many large carnivores, lions, leopards, African wild dogs show a measurable hesitation response when encountering concentrated human scent. Not always, not universally, but consistently enough to be statistically significant. The smell of humans, even in the absence of any human, triggers a caution response in animals that had no prior negative experience with people. Where does this response come from? The honest answer is we're not entirely certain. But the most compelling hypothesis is that it's the product of hundreds of thousands of years of coevolution. Humans and large African predators have been sharing the same landscape for an extraordinarily long time. Long enough for a kind of learned wariness to become embedded in predator behavior, not through individual experience, but through the selection pressure of generations. The predators that were too casual about approaching humans got speared. The predators that maintained a cautious distance from that particular scent survived, reproduced, and passed on the tendency. This is not the predators being merciful. This is the predators being selected. Natural selection does not produce mercy. It produces survival rates. And the survival rate for predators that got too close to humans started dropping sharply the moment humans developed coordinated group hunting, projectile weapons, and the social capacity to pursue a threat across a landscape rather than just flee from it. Humans, it turns out, are terrifying. We just forgot, because we live in houses now. Let's talk about what humans actually are from a predator's perspective, because this reframe is important and almost nobody makes it. A lion is large, fast, strong, and armed with claws and teeth that can kill most prey animals almost instantly. It is an apex predator by any conventional measure. And it is significantly less dangerous over evolutionary time than a group of Homo sapiens with spears and a reason to be angry. A single lion that kills a human does not simply walk away and move on. Historically, it triggers a coordinated, multi-generational response. The group pursues. The group tracks. The group does not give up the way prey animals do when they escape. Prey animals run until they're safe, and then they stop. Humans pursue until the threat is eliminated. Across days, across distance, across terrain, with the specific intention of finding the thing that hurt one of their members and making sure it cannot do so again. Lions that developed a habit of eating humans got hunted to extinction in most of the regions where humans settled. Not because individual humans are more dangerous than individual lions, but because a group of humans with social coordination and projectile weapons is one of the most dangerous things that has ever walked this planet for any predator that crosses it. The wariness large predators feel toward humans is not irrational. It is the accumulated wisdom of an evolutionary bloodbath that we are no longer aware of because we were the ones who won it. But here's the part of the story that complicates everything. The wariness isn't permanent. And it isn't universal. And the conditions under which it breaks down are deeply relevant to the world we live in right now. Predators that grow up without exposure to humans don't have the same hesitation. Animals in regions where human hunting was eliminated, where the historical pressure that produced predator wariness has been absent for generations, show meaningfully different behavior around people than their counterparts in areas with long human-predator contact history. In areas of Africa where lion populations were protected from human contact for long periods, researchers have documented lions approaching human campsites with a confidence that wildlife managers in other regions find alarming. These animals didn't receive the generational memo. The selection pressure that shaped cautious behavior was removed, and within a handful of generations. The caution started to erode. There are also individual variation factors that make certain predators dangerous regardless of population-level tendencies. Old animals with worn teeth who can no longer take healthy prey. Injured animals who need an easier meal. Animals in regions where their natural prey has been depleted by habitat loss or overhunting. These are the conditions that produce man-eaters, not random savagery, but a rational response to changed circumstances from an animal doing what it evolved to do: survive. The Tsavo lions, when examined by modern researchers using dental analysis, showed signs of significant tooth decay and injury. The dental pain they were likely experiencing would have made their normal prey significantly harder to take down. A sleeping human, by contrast, was easy. The man-eating wasn't aberrant behavior. It was problem-solving, which is deeply unsettling in a way that random monster behavior simply isn't. Let's zoom back out, because there's a bigger pattern underneath all of this that connects fire and group sleeping and predator psychology and human evolution into something more unified and more interesting than just a list of survival mechanisms. Humans are the only animal that dramatically reshapes the risk calculus for every other large animal in the ecosystem simply by being present. Not by being physically dangerous as individuals, but by being socially dangerous as groups. The presence of humans in a landscape changes predator behavior at the population level. It changes where they hunt, when they move, how they raise their young, how close they'll come to certain areas. We are, ecologically speaking, a fear-generating species. We produce a landscape of anxiety for the animals around us simply by existing and by having a well-deserved historical reputation for coordinated lethal response. This is why, incidentally, the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone changed the behavior of elk not just in areas where wolves actually were, but in areas where wolves might be. The elk didn't just change where they grazed. They changed how they grazed, how long they stayed in open areas, how much time they spent in places where escape routes were limited. The fear itself, the possibility of the predator, restructured the entire ecosystem. Ecologists call this the landscape of fear. Humans created a landscape of fear for the top predators of every region we've ever occupied. And sleeping in the middle of that landscape, for a predator that has spent its evolutionary history learning that humans are something to approach very carefully, is a risk calculation that most of the time comes out as not worth it. So circle back to where we started. You're lying on the ground. It's dark. You're completely unconscious. And somewhere, a lion is awake. Why doesn't it come for you? It might, if it's desperate enough. If it's the wrong kind of lion, in the wrong kind of situation, with the wrong kind of injury and the wrong history of human contact. Sleeping outside without fire, without a group, in territory with hungry predators, and no historical human presence is genuinely dangerous and has been throughout human history. But under the conditions that most humans slept for most of our existence, the answer is a layered, accumulated, almost architectural set of defenses that we built without fully understanding we were building them. Fire that exploits a neurological vulnerability baked into predator brains over millions of years of evolution. Group sleeping patterns that ensure the group is never fully unconscious simultaneously, distributing vigilance across the night without any individual bearing the entire burden. A chemical signature that carries a warning developed over hundreds of thousands of years of coevolutionary selection pressure. And beneath all of it, a reputation. A species-level reputation for coordinated, persistent, disproportionate response to being threatened that made even the top predators of every ecosystem treat the sleeping human as a problem with too many possible costs and not enough guaranteed reward. We didn't survive the night by being physically impressive. Lions are more impressive. Leopards are faster. Hyenas are more tenacious. We survived the night by being socially sophisticated in ways that accumulated defensive benefits we never had to consciously engineer. Our ancestors didn't sit down and design a sleep defense system. They just stayed together, kept the fire going, and responded devastatingly every time something came for one of them. Generation after generation after generation. And the predators learned, not through reasoning, not through planning, but through the oldest teacher in the natural world, which is that the things that kill you stop being done by the ones who survive. There is something quietly profound about this. We talk about human uniqueness in terms of language, art, mathematics, philosophy, the things we build upward, the achievements that separate us from the rest of the animal world by aspiration and invention. But some of the most important things about us are the things we built downward, deep into the structure of ecosystems, into the behavioral patterns of other species, into the landscape itself. We carved our presence into the nervous systems of the animals around us so thoroughly that they still feel it today, in places where human hunters haven't walked for generations. The lion that hesitates at the edge of a campfire's light tonight isn't making a decision. It's following an instruction written into its behavior by thousands of years of what happened to lions that didn't hesitate. And you sleep safely in that hesitation without knowing it exists. Next time you wake up at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling for no reason, heart faintly elevated, alert without knowing why, consider the possibility that you're not broken. Consider that this is your nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do. Checking, monitoring, running the ancient background process that kept your ancestors alive through the long dark for 100,000 years before anyone thought to put walls around the night. You're not anxious. You're a sentinel. You're just doing it wrong because there's no fire and the lion is 12,000 miles away. Sleep is not a vulnerability our species stumbled through by luck. It is a negotiated truce, written not in words, but in fire and blood and 10,000 generations of accumulated behavioral consequences. The darkness was never as empty as it looked. And the fact that you're here, reading this, breathing, means your ancestors held up their end of the deal. Every single night. For a very, very long time.